Hello, my name's Will. I'm going to be talking about painting miniatures today. This will be the first in a series. This is just going to be basically getting started, getting your kit together. We'll actually start painting in the next video. I know there are several videos out there on painting. Some are good, some are bad. My purpose here is just to show people that this can be a simple hobby. And that it can be fun. You don't have to go into a lot of detail. This is more for the amateur, just the person who wants to enjoy himself. So I got started many years ago, back in 5th or 6th grade. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons. We never used minis when we played it. We did more of our combat in mind. Got away from playing that for a while and went to a convention, gaming convention. I was more interested in board gaming at the time, but they had a paint and take. So this here was the first figure that I had done in the paint and take. I was more interested in just making sure I got the paint in the right places and didn't have, dress color all over their chest or stuff like that. And I thought it turned out well enough, which, I'll let you decide. But it was enough for me to get interested and start as a hobby. Some people have seen my painting, said you could do this professionally, and they're wrong. I'm really not that good at it, but I have done one job, quote unquote, professionally. I painted 2 figures for someone, and I charged them one random figure. Just buy me one. So he bought me this. That was about 1.5 to 2 years ago. I still haven't painted him, partly because about 2 weeks before he bought me that, I'd already painted him. I'm still going to end up painting this one. That's one of the things I like about this hobby is you can buy a dozen of the same figure and you can just paint them and paint them, and you can paint them a dozen different ways and never get tired of it. And so that's what I do sometimes, is I just paint minis. It's a fun little hobby, like I said. So the first question is obviously, what do I need to get started painting? And again, the obvious answers to that are going to be brushes. And so you're probably going to want a flat tip and a pointy tipped brush. Paint, obviously. We'll talk about that a little later. You're going to want minis to paint, obviously. And you're going to want things like water to clean your brushes with a paper towel. A palette to mix your paints with, which most people use a plastic paper plate. Minis tend to come in something that looks like that. They got the clear part to show off the mini, and they got the little cardboard base to hang on a rack and give information about the mini. So when I just tear it off, I just use this part, and that's my palette. I mix paint on that. What else? You're going to possibly want some other things. Now, some minis, when they're cast, they will have, it's hard to see on here. There, that you can see it a little better. You can see it's a mold line. Basically, when they put the mold together, they injected the resin in, and some of it got in the crack in the mold. And so some people like to use an X-Acto knife to scrape that away. If you're using pewter or metal minis, you can use the file to scrape it away. And so these, again, they're not necessary. A lot of times I'll just paint over that and no one notices. Sometimes the cast is done in such a way that the mold line runs along a hairline or along a weapon, so it's not as noticeable. Some little clips are handy, not necessary all the time, but sometimes you get minis which are cast, multiple minis cast on the same casting, and you just have to cut them loose. And again, you can use your file to shave that down if you want to, or glue. Sometimes minis will come in multiple pieces. So we got this guy here, and his arm came separately, and you'd have to glue that on. There it goes. And his face also came on separately, so I'd have to glue that on. And then you can start painting him. Sometimes you might need a pinning kit. There are some, especially like the older metal ones. Just gluing this on isn't going to work as well, even though it's designed to be. So you might have to pin it. I will discuss pinning in a further episode. I really don't like pinning. It's hard to do and I'm not very good at it. So I usually buy things that don't need to be pinned. Now that they started making resin, they started making the interlocking parts just work nicely. And they also have different shapes. So you can look at that and say that goes in that hole. Just by telling the shape. So if they got if both of his arms are off, sometimes it's hard to tell which arm is which. You can usually tell by looking at the shape of the pin. And what else would you want? Basing supply. So for instance, this guy we saw, he came actually with a base. He goes in the slot. So you'd want to glue them on the base. We will talk about basing a little later as well, just because some people do it real fancy, some people do it real cheap. I, for the most part, do it cheap, but actually we'll discuss a little about basing at the end of this episode. What else do we have here? Sometimes with the pewter ones, with the casting, this will be almost like a mold line, same problem. This will come off. That can usually be twisted off. Just snapped off with your finger, but you might want to just file that down a little just because, it does, so it looks a little better. And again, it's not really necessary. Often if you paint it, it's going to not show, but some people are perfectionists and they want to do that. Also, you will notice on this, the mold line, that you might want to definitely file down before you try to base it, just because you got this little extra nub sitting up here, which is going to make your, actually that's not, that's actually another little thread that can be just pulled off. Sometimes it'll be like a little ridge under here which you have to shave down just to get it to fit. I did not notice this was not one of those. Okay, and of course paints are what you're going to want. So I said we talk about that later. Paints, sometimes they come in a little bottle like this, sometimes they come, I mainly use these. And so to get started, a good basic painting kit would be white and black, brown, and your 3 primary colors. And with those 6, you can mix almost any color you want. The problem with that is mixing. If you mix a color and then you run out of it while you're using it, then you got to try to mix it exactly the same or deal with it being different when you remix it, or it can get a little frustrating. So you might want to expand on that. Black and white, maybe a light and dark brown this time. We'll replace our blue with a light and dark blue. We'll throw in a light and dark green. Probably still use the red. Might use the light and dark red if you want. Yellow still goes in. Maybe a light and dark gray. Maybe a purple and orange. Maybe a flesh tone. And then they also make metallic paints. I got copper, gray, and gold here. Again, not as necessary. You can still do all your weapons gray if you want, but if you want it to look a little better, you might want to buy the gray metallic, I think this is shadowed steel. And that's still a nice basic set, and we're getting up in price there a little bit, but it's still, a bottle of paint will last you 6 months to a year, so the price isn't too bad if you're going to do this as a hobby. Or you can really go whole hog and you can just buy, boy, I can't even show it on the camera. I got dozens of paints from painting for so long. But I mean, there are all sorts of shades of blue. It's, some of them, they look the same sometimes. Sometimes we got aqua blue, which I like to use a lot. We got marine blue, which is a little off from aqua. Actually, I think at the time I thought I was buying the same thing because I was running low on one of them, which is why I bought 2 of those that look so close alike. I got, I'm not going to show you all my paints, but you can buy dozens of them, and we're getting very expensive. So it's like, why should I start this really expensive hobby that I might not like because, that might be the best I can do, which, hopefully I've improved since this. But and so what you might want to try doing is going to your local hobby shop, your local gaming store, asking them if they have a painting day or if they know of any place that has painting, any local hobby clubs. And basically, they would expect you to buy a figure of some sort and maybe throw in $2 or $3 for supplies, and you can paint your figure. And that's less than $10. You get a chance to paint and see if you like it and see if it's something you want to do as a hobby. And that's worth doing. Like I said, there's not really a reason not to try it at least once. Okay, so our next question is, what do I want to paint? I'm going to go to my local hobby store and I'm going to try this. What do I want to paint? Skeleton, nice and easy. Actually, a little too easy in my opinion. I forgot some stuff. Sorry about this. Go backtrack a little bit. Painting kit. I also use a nail. And why do I use a nail? Because sometimes I use these, the paint gets dried out in the spout. It doesn't want to come out, so I take my nail and I jam it in there. This one obviously it hasn't happened. And I jam my nail in there. Also got my little alligator clip here, which I can grab my nail with and pull it out. Thumbtack works just as well, and you don't need the alligator grip, but I didn't have a thumbtack when I started this. An old toothbrush, which I forgot to bring out here. That's just basically because when they cast these, whether it is with the pewter or with the resin, what they do is they spray the mold with basically like a cooking spray to keep the figure from sticking when it's done. And when they pull it out, sometimes the cooking spray gets stuck on the outside of this. So you might want to, scrub it down. Plain soap and water works, but like an old toothbrush just to scrub it to make sure you get it and just, get it clean works well too, and it makes the dough a little better. I did not talk about, when I talk about paint, is a primer. Most places will sell it or you can buy it. The resin figures were cast so they didn't need primer. Most of the metal ones do, although I rarely use primer. I'm just not in the habit of doing it. It just helps the paint stick to it a little better. They also have brush-on sealant, which you can get it in a spray or you can get it in a bottle. And this, most of your paints are water soluble. The brushes clean well, everything cleans well. Problem is when you handle them, sweat on your hand will make the paint come off. So a brush-on sealant, you can coat it when you're done painting it and it'll come off. You'll be able to handle it without worrying about damaging the paint as much. Little plastic lid. And this is just so I can put my thing on there, I can paint it. Like I said, I don't want to touch it while it's still wet, so I can move it aside and I can start on another figure and I can paint it for a while. And as I let that dry, I pull this one up and start painting on it again. Similar to that, I use sort of the giant alligator clip, and that's again for these, which they're designed, they got the little flat part designed to be put in a slot. If I don't want to base it before I start painting, I can clip that on there. I can hold this, I can put it down when I'm done. And last but not least, I started recently using a magnifying glass just because my eyesight started getting bad. I know, like, if you see some videos, you'll see like they'll have the light with the built-in magnifying glass on a swivel and the person's hunched over it painting. I don't really do that, but I do, since my eyesight's starting getting bad, it's just a matter of I'll paint something, then I'll just look over it to make sure I got coverage and did I get, is there resin showing through, or is there, unpainted surface showing through. This helps me some now. Okay, so back to the old question I had just asked, what do I want to paint? And we were looking at our skeleton man. real simple. Unfortunately, a little too simple. I mean, I could paint this guy and I could think, wow, that went real well and I'm a good painter, but really there was no challenge to this. The hardest part was getting the back of his shield and not getting his arm, and that wasn't really that hard. The leather straps on the back of his shield, which, see if I can zoom in there. Yeah, you can't really tell, but that's a slightly different color than his shield. But, you know, that was really the hardest part, and it wasn't a challenge. I might have fooled myself into thinking I'm good at this when I wasn't if I had done him first. This guy's not a bad one to start with. Little villager there. You've got a few hard spaces around here where you gotta manipulate the brush, and you want to be careful not to get pitchfork on the shirt or shirt on the pitchfork. Got a few details with his belt buckle, the little lacing on his tunic, which is hard to see here. You got the flames there. You can do a little free form and do multicolor tasking, you know, yellow and orange. Does that look good? Oh, it doesn't look good. I'll paint over it again. Fire is a good practice thing because you can always paint over it again and again if you don't like the old one. Sort of similar. I would have stayed away from this one as a beginner. I did this last night, so I knew sort of what I was doing. But it's just a matter of getting the sword back there was really difficult, and that would have frustrated me if I tried doing it as a beginner. So that one I would have avoided. You know, just be a little careful if there's too much small stuff going on where you have to reach the brush in, because that can get frustrating until you've had some practice at it. And another one, few minor details, fairly simple. So not a lot of detail actually, like I said, minor ones, but you're still trying to get back where on the cloak and stuff without getting on the arms and the... So that's not a bad one to practice on, just because, or a bad one to start with, just because you got to do a little bit of hard stuff. So you don't want it too simple. You want to challenge yourself a little. You don't want it too hard. I sort of looked through my collection and couldn't find a good example of a really hard one that I would call hard, so don't have one to show you. So we've decided on our mini and we've scrubbed it down. We're ready to go. So first thing I'm going to talk about here is basing your mini. Why would we base a mini? And part of it because you got this, and it's not bad. It's a great little pose. Guy's leaning forward with her sword. I think that's a girl actually. It doesn't matter, but it's a little bit unsteady. So we take the same figure, we put a base under it, and it doesn't fall down as easily. It's still going to fall down eventually, but you know, something will knock it over. But it's not as easy. This guy. So this guy was originally standing on these tombstones, and I mean, it raised him up. His wings were making him. He would fall down repeatedly. Even when I based him, he kept falling down. So I took some sculpting putty and I just started piling these stones on front until he had enough counterbalance to keep him from falling over. And that's something you can do when you base. If you're playing a game, then most things they want them based just because it's easier to tell where someone is. And you know, the map you're using on is usually folded so it doesn't fall over as easily. There are many different ways to base. Usually, like I said, a lot of times they'll come with these little plastic bases, or you can buy these separate. Little super glue, put them on there, it's done. I usually don't use super glue because it doesn't work well for me. I will also, instead of buying those, I will just use a washer. You might have noticed these guys are based on washers. It's got some weight to it. Most gaming minis are 1-inch bases. 1-inch washers are easy to come by. A box of them are cheap. Usually I put a little glue on, stick them on. I used to use spackling compound, and I would just like let the glue dry for a while. Then I'd take like a flat, you know, usually popsicle stick or something, get some spackling compound and just put it around the base. It'll look something like that when done, only you'll notice that's not spackling compound. That is in fact the green stuff. The green stuff is a sculpting putty. It's somewhat expensive, not really expensive. It's like $9 for 8 inches of it, but I can base 20 to 25 figures with 8 inches of it. So, I don't consider it expensive, considering how many minis I can do with it. And I also use it, you use the glue if something needs to be put together. I'll sometimes use it to do that. So the green stuff, it looks like this, or it comes like this. You got a yellow and blue strip. What you want to do, you want to get it exposed a little. This is the plastic it came in is wrapping around it, so it likes to stick to that. See if I can't. There we go. You want to try to tear off an even strip of it, about a little of that off. And this is designed so that it'll stay soft as long as it's not mixed together. And you don't leave it out. That's one of the reasons they wrap it in plastic, is so that it doesn't mix together. And what I will do in order to try to keep, an even consistency of yellow and blue is I will just twist it and start twisting and spindling it. And I'll fold it in on itself some. Rub it out. Start to twist it again. And again, the reason I twist it is I'm trying to keep the yellow and blue mixing evenly throughout. There are times when you will do this and, it doesn't have to be perfectly green. I will sometimes do it just, it'll have a few blue streaks or a few yellow streaks in it. But the more green you get it, the better it's going to hold in the long run. This can take 2 or 3 minutes to do, so I'm going to talk about green stuff as much as I can, and you're going to hear me repeating spindling and twisting and spiraling and all these words that I use as I try to get this to look more green. And fold it in on itself and twist and stretch and press, and there it's starting to look nice and green there. It's got some yellow in it. It doesn't have to be perfectly green, but the closer to green you get it, the better, and you don't want large lumps of yellow in it, so just keep going, keep going. People think I'm a geek for doing this sometimes, but hey, you're the ones watching a guy talk about twisting putty together. Okay, so that's actually looking fairly good. One thing about this is it is soft, it is a little sticky, so you want to put it on something that it's, if I put it directly on the box here, then it will start to stick there and I'll be tearing up little bits of box as I did it. Like I said, I can use this as an adhesive, and so I'm going to take one of these figures which came in pieces, and I'm going to put it together. If I can find where I put the arms to this guy. Where did his arms go? Ah, there they are. They're stuck on them. Okay. So one thing about using this as an adhesive is usually, especially with these molded ones, that's designed to fit in the hole. And so putting a little bit of putty on it is going to fill up part of the space. And so this might stick out a little further than we'd expect. And so we just gotta squeeze it in and hold it tight and force it to some extent, if we can even get it in the hole there. And I had it upside down. No, I didn't. Just a second. Okay, there we go. So we stuck that arm on, and I'll pull another small piece out. We're going to stick the other arm on. There we go. And this guy actually has a tail, so I'm going to use this little extra bit that came off to put his tail on. And then his hands get a little bit. And this was designed so his weapon is held in two hands. So they put his weapon and hands as a single piece by themselves. So this is where this one's going to get a little more tricky to put on. This one will be easy to paint, but it'll be harder to put together. So I would not have suggested this one as a starter piece, but I am doing it just to show you some of the intricacies that can come along. And boom. You see there's going to be a little bit of green sticking out there at his wrist, you can see. That's really not such a problem. If it is, you can easily take one of your files after it dries or an X-Acto knife and just scrape away at it. But, I mean, that right there is not going to make such a big deal. That one's actually going to be a little, you want to squeeze that one tighter. And of course his face has to go on. And I'll just stick that in the hole in the back of his face. And his tail just came out from his hand, my hand. There's his face. Put his tail back on. And there we got this little water buffalo minotaur type guy. And this guy's, he would be in a gaming world a larger creature, so I just use a larger washer. I take a little more of this. Stretch it out into a loop. On my base. Stretch it out, stretch it out, stretch it out. Sort of get it towards the edges if possible. Take my mini. Put him on there. I will try to get him. And then we just squeeze him down. Take a little more of my putty. Work it around here. We want to sort of get some coverage of the base. We want to go over a little over the part of the mini there, the base. I guess I'm using base two different ways here, so this is a base of the sculpt, and then my washer is the base. I guess I'll say washer until it's actually firmly on there. Spindle that out. But we want to just sort of make sure this covers the base of the mini and the washer. You want to do a little overlap over the base of the mini so that it's held on from above as well as from below. And you just sort of smooth that into place. And again, you don't have to do it this way. This is just the way I do it. There are other ways you can base these. You know, honestly, the spackle is probably the most cost-effective. The only problem is the spackle will dry quickly once you open the bottle. So if you don't use it, even though you're resealing the bottle, it will dry over time. And I'm really not as concerned about bits of metal showing through there around the base, just because I am going to be painting over that anyway. And so he looks like this. This will take maybe 1 or 2 hours to dry, so this is one of the things you base in advance and then you set it aside and you let it dry. We also have this little witch figure, which she's got a few, there's a few places there which you got to manipulate the brush. She's got wide eyes. That's one of the reasons I chose her as one of the demos I'm going to do, just so we can do a little more detail on the eyes and show how to do that later. She will use a smaller base. 1-inch washer works for her. And again, we make our little loop. Stretch it out, stretch it out. Put it on the washer. I want a thicker piece of putty for that. And get it on the putty. Again, her base here is a little smaller, so you just want to make sure you got putty about where she's going to be standing, but you don't want too much to go underneath her. You just want enough to hold her on, and then the rest you're going to pour over, stretch over, spread over. So these are the 2 figures that we are going to be painting in future episodes, and I'll do some painting on them. I'll talk about some techniques while we paint, get a little history, possibly answer a few questions. Yeah, I'm really not the best source for some questions, but I've been doing this for a few years now, so I can at least answer some of these simple how to get started questions, as opposed to the really, intricate airbrushing, etc., which I don't do. But these are the 2 we are going to be painting as part of our demo. Again, I got this left over, but I got plenty of other figures here I can base, and I will be basing them with that. And that is how we got started. Might as well put these guys back here so you can see them as we talk. And that is it for today. Again, my name's Will. Come back for future episodes, which I hope to be putting up every 1 or 2 weeks. And I will see you all later. Thank you and goodbye.